Thanks, Ciaran Corla. Taoiseach, Finland, or the government of Finland, along with the government of Sweden, have just announced their intention to ditch neutrality and to apply to join NATO. NATO is a US-led military alliance that is responsible for decades of brutal occupation in Afghanistan and other horrendous atrocities in the Middle East. During the war, in terms of Kosovo, they bombed hospitals, prisons, embassies, as well as many people's homes. The political establishment in Sweden and in Finland have used the horrendous Russian invasion of Ukraine to drive a pre-existing agenda of joining NATO. It's a classic example of what Naomi Klein called a shock doctrine, to use a real crisis to drive a pre-existing agenda. And the same shock doctrine is on display here, in my opinion, reflected in the Taoiseach's comments that neutrality is a policy issue that can change at any time.
Thank you, Deputy.
I think if you had a free hand, you'd like to sign Ireland up to NATO. But you know you don't have a free hand, so instead you want to chip away, bit by bit, at what is left of neutrality. Please. Will you commit to give people a referendum to enshrine neutrality in the Constitution, to remove it, to stop it being a policy matter that can change at any time?
Just for deputies generally, the view of, and they're not the Swedish establishment or the Finnish establishment, it's the elected government of those countries. No, but that language establishment sort of conveys as if there's some sort of elite up there who has no connection with anybody. They're elected, and it's the elected government I met. And I just want to say through Chair that they said to me, and no one more than Finland has navigated an extraordinary relationship with Russia over such a long period of time, peacefully, coexistence. But as the Prime Minister said to me, everything they were taught during their school days about the potential fear, the potential threat, what could happen, came to realisation in the invasion of Ukraine. And given that they're physically on the border, there's a very fundamental question begs to be answered. Who will come to protect us if Russia invades? No one's obliged to right now. There's a mutual assistance clause in the European Union which is not as well defined as the NATO provisions are for a country like Finland. Ukraine is not in NATO. Ukraine is defending itself. It's getting supports, getting weaponry, but essentially it's young Ukrainian men who are at the front line. And I don't think, deputies, you can ever take from the fact the reason Finland and Sweden are applying now is simply because of the immoral and unjustifiable invasion of Ukraine by Russia. There is no other rationale for it. And that has been the clear catalyst. I wouldn't call it a shock doctrine either, that people are just delighted that it's so we can now join. I don't think that's it. And I think the public opinion has changed. Public opinion has changed dramatically. And as Deputy McAuliffe said there, the vote in itself in the Parliament is indicative of the degree to which public opinion has shifted in both countries because of what has happened. I mean, what's happening is barbaric. By any standard, what is happening is barbaric. And entire towns and cities have been levelled in Ukraine. And if you're near the border or on the border, you'd have a much different perspective, I'm afraid. That's just the reality of life and human nature. I don't buy the argument that that sort of the NATO planning major exercises are somehow comparable to what's happening in Ukraine. They are not. NATO has attacked nobody. NATO has not attacked anybody. NATO didn't bomb any town, didn't bomb any city. But this kind of whataboutery, this sort of attempts by Deputy Murphy and Deputy Boyd Barrett to sort of draw, to have equivalence between NATO and Russia behaviour is unacceptable. It's wrong, in my view. It's wrong. It's just plain wrong. Because NATO did everything they possibly could, and NATO states like France, Germany, did everything they could to prevent war prior to war breaking out.